Perfect. Okay, now we're recording. Yes. So this workshop is focusing on moving beyond the core files, finding new affirmatives, new off case, and in the process, and then at the end, some different strategies from like the coach perspective. So the intro of me. So I'm Victoria again. I am a program officer at Chicago Debates. So first of all, this is the first coach workshop. So we wanted to kind of go through our rationale of why we're doing the coach workshops. So first, the most important reason is just the empowerment of coaches. There's a lot that kids will ask, and to help them become better debaters, we think that us supporting the coaches and really teaching you all how to present these things to your students and empower you versus students and debaters just learning from us or they're like experts. We want to really equip our wonderful coaches with the knowledge that they need to be successful, because we know that a lot of people, maybe they were debaters but not necessarily policy, or they didn't learn specific things from debate. And so our goal is to really help fill in those gaps and really create even better coaches. As well as there'll be a resource list after this. So you'll have resources on all these topics to go to for further learning, to send your kids to when they have questions. And then third main goal is just material creation. We want to have a bank of videos and knowledge and all of that for our coaches moving forward. And the fourth is to build out more support. Again, our job is to support coaches, but that looks, I think, very differently sometimes. So hopefully these series of workshops will really help build out that support that we want. So this workshop specifically will first talk a little bit about kind of the process of cutting cards, maybe some things that weren't necessarily always talked about in the beginning of cutting cards, making sure we're filling in any of those gaps. Second is finding an affirmative, where we look, kind of how we start, what is that process, then finding a new off case, which looks a lot like finding an affirmative, but it's a little different. And then the last thing is a strategy. So how do we encourage students to cut through on affirmatives? Like what are some different ways, depending on really the level of the student coming into this, because different students need different things. So one of the thoughts here is just putting out a plethora of different strategies to help all of our coaches just really encourage that. So first, for the cutting cards, kind of our research resources. Don't underestimate the power of the Chicago Public Library. Through the library, you can get access to a lot of really great legal databases, things like EBSCOhost that I really love to use, especially for the solvency advocates of affirmatives, some of those more in-depth processes. The Chicago Public Library is such a great resource, definitely underutilized. Another debate thing at least I only learned because of debate, is the power of using quotations in Google searches. So often, key phrases of the topic, you can use, criminal justice reform in quotations. And other things in quotations are going to be really important to figure out, when I was looking at the predictive policing affirmative, I often would put predictive policing, in quotes, and then put in what other search term. This is just a reminder that is just so helpful. And then I also search a lot of think tanks. So some of them like Brookings, Rand, Cato, Heritage, Council on Formulations, Center for American Progress. There's a lot of these out here. And sometimes just browsing these just helps you. Sometimes there's topic-specific ones. So this year, there's also Brennan Center for Justice is where I found a lot of the different advocates that ended up in the core files. So just searching through these, reading through these has always been helpful for me to find some really quality policy-centered arguments. And kind of the rules of card cutting, just because it's hard to find these actually written anywhere, which is the paragraph rule, which is very important. Always include whole paragraphs. Start and stop at paragraph breaks. If you're not including the whole article, be sure that you cut it off at a paragraph break. Be sure you start at a paragraph break. This is a very important rule. And then cites should always include basically what citations included in the academic paper. So name, qualification, title, dates, things like that. The URL, if it exists, if it's not like a printed book. The qualifications aren't normally included in a research paper that a student would write, but this will be important in debate rounds. So always like tell your students that if they see the qualification of their author, they should absolutely put it in there because that's going to help them in the debate. Then verbatim. This is a debate-specific word template, actually. And so if you haven't used this or if your students haven't really gotten into this, it's super, super helpful. It's great for standardized formatting. The macros are amazing. It also creates really great layers in files. So if you ever open up the core files in Microsoft Word and open the navigation pane, you'll see that everything is like organized based on so it's like the affirmative, and then it's the 1AC, and then there's like 2AC blocks, and then it specifies which 2AC block, and so on. And so that is done through verbatim. And so how to get to this is just to go to like verbatim debate on Google, and then you will see a page like this. This is verbatim. So there's two different versions. One's Windows, one's Mac. There's also, if anyone has a PC, there's also a great timer app done by Verbatim. And this has a lot of really cool like macros and shortcut keys that help cut cards a lot faster. I'm a big fan of it. So highly recommend this. There is a Google Docs version, which we should send more out on. It's not as great as the Word version, but if you have Word, definitely worth downloading Verbatim and using it as a debate template. Debaters are also known to like start taking class notes in Verbatim and like formatting it like a debate document because we're weird like that. So Verbatim comes in very, very usefully. But yeah, the Google Docs version, I need to learn a little bit more about that, but I will definitely be looking more into that. But that's helpful. And so the process of cutting cards, I guess it's just more like refresher. We'll probably do more in card cutting on the research lecture, but this is just the kind of overview. So I was open a new Verbatim file. You won't get the cool debate macros if you don't do that. Copy paste without formatting is really helpful. So be sure to do that. Otherwise, you have to reformat everything and there's weird links, and just do without formatting. You can either do the whole article or stop and start at paragraphs. I always like to do the whole article, and then depending on what paragraphs I don't use, then I can, take off the top, 3 paragraphs or whatever. But that just gives me the option. And then the citation, I honestly create the citation like at the end. So whatever works for you. So both the full citation with everything including it, but then also like the red citation, as I put it in quotes here, of just the name and date. And then the tag of cards, some do that at the beginning. I do it at the very end, or pass it off to someone else to do because I don't like tagging cards. But it depends on how your brain works. And then bold and underline the parts to be read. And then there's this cool verbatim function of condense that removes all the paragraph breaks. If you want to do that, some people don't remove paragraph breaks when they cut cards, really up to you. And then there's a shrink function on verbatim as well that makes everything not underlined in 8-point font, which is, I think, really helpful for reading cards. So now, defining affirmative, the part that we all came here for. So the why question is always important to ask. So one of the important whys is just more topics to learn about, expand student minds. Second is topics that are closer to students' interest. Not gonna lie, not everyone's probably that excited about the core files at all point, but sometimes you can really get a student so excited about debate by having a more personalized affirmative. Like my first ever debate topic was a military debate topic. And one of the countries in the topic was Turkey, and my dad was from Turkey. And so my coach helped me work on a Turkey affirmative that was just mine. And because I got to be more involved in learning about Turkish politics and speaking about a country where my family came from, it made me so much more excited about debate. And so if you can find something like that for students that just is so exciting for them in their own case, like that's just really, I think, such a powerful incentive for them to get really excited about debate. I know it worked really well for me. So hopefully we can find things that match your students' interests a little bit more. And one of the best ways to do that is find an affirmative that really speaks to them in some way. The third thing is ownership. It becomes like their AF and they get a real piece in the topic and get to speak on their own voice. And then the fourth is, of course, the strategic advantage. Like, people aren't going to have full answers to it, and that's exciting. We love when kids are able to put in a lot of work, and then they get to win debates off of that, and that's always so rewarding. But yeah, the search. So 4 ways, kind of in chronological order, of when they start appearing throughout the year. So the first is the topic paper, underutilized resource. So it's put out by the National Federation of High Schoolers. Keep in mind that it's a proposal for a topic area, so it will include parts of the topic that aren't ultimately chosen. So the one from this year does include prisons, which isn't part of the topic, but it includes a lot of great ideas of affirmative ground and negative ground. So I'll actually pause here and move to the topic paper to show you what it looks like. So this is the topic paper for criminal justice reform. The best way to find it is just type in criminal justice reform topic paper debate. I couldn't find it on the NFHS website. But this is how I started with cutting the core files, is I went to the topic paper first to figure out what are some key areas. And so if you go to division of ground is going to be where you start to get some of those areas. So areas like all the affirmatives. So this is where the body cameras affirmative came from. I wasn't that creative. It was there. So it gives some different options. It's like the public database is a really big affirmative, and all sorts of things here, plea bargains. What's odd is a lot of people don't go to the topic paper. So often you can find affirmatives in the topic paper that no one has read yet, which is wild to me. So there's all sorts of things here. I would just read through the topic paper. It's great. And there's also the like negative, the same sort of ground explanation that talks about what some of the key negative arguments are. So this is also a great way to start with the negative research. In the topic paper also are some great definitions. So, pass the wording. So if you're finding a new affirmative, we'll talk about the topicality aspect in a second, but you can go to the topic paper to find some of these initial definitions. That'll be helpful for you when you're trying to figure out, is my affirmative topical? A real question. This tab. Sorry about that. And the second way is just putting, again, in quotes, words of the topic, looking at policy think tanks, just searching through those. I searched through like Brennan Center for Justice to find some of the cases that we're reading now. Just look into the words of the topic, put the word policy after it. And third way is camp files. So different debate camps across the country participate in the NDCA Open Evidence Project, which looks like this. And it'll have all sorts of disadvantages and negatives and affirmatives and critiques and impact files. So a lot of just inspiration that you can get from here. Cards you can steal. Impact files are great for impact cards. There's no reason to recut the same evidence. And then the last one is the wiki. When I look at the NDCA wiki, which it's useful to know some of the big debate schools to be able to look at their wiki and figure out what all they read. But yes, there's a lot here. And so through the wiki, you're able to kind of browse what other teams across the country are reading on their affirmatives or different disads. So that's another place to start looking. So a lot of that will just be inspiration. I'll give you different thoughts, different areas that you can move into and look into. We'll kind of talk about the strategies at the end of like, how do you use those? I wouldn't recommend just, stealing the app, but you can look at those to just get ideas and start finding some of those solvency advocates, start finding some of those advantage areas, start thinking about what people are reading, or like if you're cutting negative, thinking about what people are reading so you know how to best attack it. And then once you think you found the app via one of those 4 ways, the question is this app viable? How do you know that you've actually found an affirmative? So the 4 questions that I always ask is, first, topicality. Does it fall reasonably under the topic? might not be completely topical, but that's up to you. How topical of an affirmative you want to read is totally up to you and your students. But the question is, can we make the topicality argument? And the second is finding a solvency advocate, someone qualified actually advocating for this idea. And the third is advantage areas. 2 reasons, preferably, or 1 reason, why you should advocate for this policy. Pro-con articles are really great for this. You shouldn't cut pro-con articles because they obviously go both ways, and someone is going to point that out in a debate round. But it's so great to find those advantage areas, to find the reasons why you should do the AF, which turn into your advantages when you're producing the affirmative. And then another big question is any defense against core neg arguments. On this topic, what you're looking for is a Fed key point. So why does the federal government need to do the affirmative? Why can't it be states? You need the answer to the states counterplan, or there's a chance the AF just loses on states every round, and that's not fun for anyone. You also want to make sure you have some sort of robust answer to ideas such as federalism, anything that's like super core on the ground in a really strong position. You want to almost think backwards and be, how do I not lose to these negative positions, especially in the like big stick counterplan, such as states counterplan. And now that you've decided the AF is viable, some of the to-dos. So inherency, which is why you need this policy. Of course, finding this the solvency advocate. The states counterplan, have to have that Fed keyword. The advantages, which if you look at any of like when I see this in the core files, it always like introduces the problem, how the plan solves it, what that leads to, and impacts. And then you start working on the 2AC blocks, so the common negative positions that you think you're going to see. So that's everything that's in the core files, anything else that people are reading, and of course, topicality. So be sure to have all those. This is just the checklist. This will be more helpful when we post the slide deck. But this is everything an affirmative needs. And then once you have this, then you have an affirmative. Once you do the checklist of it's viable, and then this is everything you need for it. Once you start rolling and start going with the affirmative and like having, asked all these questions, then all of this becomes really easy. Not really easy. It becomes a lot easier than it looks. It's not really easy, but definitely less overwhelming than it seems. The impacts, I would honestly look at to open evidence and start just, not stealing the evidence, but looking at the site, recutting it. There's no reason to recut economic decline leads to war for the 15th millionth time. And then finding new AFGIS. This is the same slide. Don't worry. And so starting the search the same exact way. So the topic paper, the Google search, looking at camp files, looking at the high school wiki to see what other people are reading. Same exact way. So let's break it up into counterplans and disadvantages. So for the counterplans, it's the W8 questions for all the English teachers. Who else could do the affirmative, which is an agent counterplan? How else could we do the affirmative, which is a process counterplan? And what else could solve the problem, which is an advantage counterplan, or a counterplan that just solves one or both of the advantages, solves at the impact level rather than the solvency level. So you ask those questions. One way is you start thinking of, say, agents. So typing in courts and predictive policing, start typing in courts, money bail, states, money bail, things like that. When you start thinking of the affirmatives, and then you can start having specific counterplan solvency for the affirmatives that you think you're going to debate. But you don't have to. Sometimes the generic counterplan shell is useful, but those specific links, of course, are very helpful whenever you're finding a new counterplan. And then a new disadvantage. So I always start with the link. I think that's the hardest part. As I said before, the pro-con articles, terrible cards, but great inspiration for disadvantages. Or keywords such as whatever policy bad, whatever policy cons, should not, opposed. These seem like very basic Google searches, but at the same time, they are very helpful Google searches. I've very often just typed in various policies and just the word bad, and feel like it's so elementary, oddly, but it ends up getting really good results. So why should we not do blank, or problems with blank. That's how, for example, the budget disadvantage started this year, was looking up, why should we not use body cameras? And then I got a bunch of articles about the cost of body cameras. And I'm like, okay, that's my link. Like, it costs a lot. Do I think I can make some sort of impact with it costing a lot? And arguably, was able to find like an impact about it trades off with things. And that's how I like built the disadvantage, was just very rudimentary Google searches about these things. Or to find links of other affirmatives. I also just type in, predictive policing bad, reasons why we shouldn't. And the actual cutting of the disadvantage. So links to the topic, which we already talked about the links. Also, if you can find specific links to different cases, it's often easier once you have that initial link to then find the other links to the other affirmatives. So in the example of the budget DA, I then started Googling money bail cost, predictive policing cost, and that helped lead to the full disadvantage. And then the uniqueness level, just that it's going the other way, that the app changes it. So like, right now there is enough money happening, but it's on the brink. And then the internal link, multiple impacts are super great. So if you find different internal links, sometimes you can find those. So if you find that, say for like federalism disadvantage, that there were things about COVID, there were also things about state federalism being important to fighting global warming. So sometimes that's like federalism important, or reasons why federalism, basic Google searches like that. Sometimes when you're typing in Google searches, it feels a lot more rudimentary and just, you're like, would this actually work? Might as well try it. Often just very simple keyword Google searches are really effective. And then the impact cards, often much easier to just honestly find than to cut completely new. I would recut them, but don't reinvent the wheel here. There are plenty of pieces of evidence that say hegemony is good. There's no reason that you need to cut it again, or you need to refine something. And so any camp file, especially says like core, is generally really helpful for this. Camps will also just produce impact files. Those are also really helpful. Strategies. Again, not comprehensive at all. But the first strategy is the modified AF. So taking the camp files or affirmatives from the wiki and modifying them, changing them, recutting the evidence, finding how you can make them better, finding how you can make them different. How would this be the most exciting for you? Maybe it's even finding a solvency mechanism from someone and cutting your own advantages. This is kind of the simplest way, I think, to get started on cutting your own affirmative. And the second way, which is actually how I started with the Turkey case that I spoke about earlier, which is that the coach helps with the 1AC and any tricky off case. So if it's questionably topical, like my case was, then maybe helping write out the topicality. But the student cuts the backup. So the student cuts all the 2AC answers. They work on beefing up the 1AC. They maybe cut a new impact or a different advantage, but you start with the shell, especially the solvency part of it and the links to the advantages. And then the student and you work together, or the team works together to really create this full affirmative from just the shell of the 1AC and just parts of the 1AC, because it is hard to find these ideas for the affirmative. So this is something that really helped me when I was a novice, to help me find a case that I really liked, and it gave me so much ownership over it because I helped with it, but I wasn't at the place yet to be able to really find and cut an affirmative from scratch yet. So this helped bridge that gap for me. And then the third way is what I call inspired AF. It's inspired by the wiki or camp file, but very different solvency mechanism. So maybe you read something about different police reform. You're like, okay, this is interesting. Someone's writing a case on it. I don't like this case, or maybe I want a different case. But now that I'm thinking about this, now that the wheels are turning, this I can make this AF. And then the most advanced strategy is just wholly from scratch, an affirmative that no one else is reading, all new advantages, all of that. But you'll see here that there is kind of a spectrum of different ways to approach cutting a new affirmative, and that completely from scratch, whole new solvency mechanism, something no one else is reading, is not always what's best for a specific team, not always what's best for each student. It depends. And so that's why there's, all of these strategies, and all of them are good, especially if they get students interested in research. If they get students interested in learning and cutting their own files, and having that ownership is so good. So they might not be ready to fully cut from scratch. I know I wasn't. But getting them started to think about this and teaching them that important research component is just so important. Then the specific previewing process, because this is about previewing apps. How we do it at Chicago is the program officer for your conference will send out the link to the Google Drive folder. And then in this document, you'll put the explanation of the affirmative or off case, the plan text, if it's an app or counter plan, and then the tags and the citations. So that's pretty simple. But yeah, that was a lot. Any sort of questions about this? Other than yes, it was a lot, but we will be posting this and also answering questions as they come. But it's just kind of an overview, gives you different places to look, gives you different strategies that will be hopefully helpful to get everyone started.
I don't have a question, but in Texas, we teach the students on the URLs to put the retrieve date. Like
oh, yes, you could do that.
They found it in case the website is taken down or changed or whatever.
Yes, great point. I did forget that. Yes, put the date accessed. Yes, that's an important date to put on there as well. I just forgotten to put that, but yes. Yeah, I also feel like I ran through that very quickly, but yeah, part of it's just because the process is just really about diving into it and getting your feet wet and just being knee deep in those Google searches. So that's kind of hard to do at an overview level, but. Okay. Thank you, Dalen. Love that. Perfect. Yeah, this is, I think, much shorter than I expected, but hopefully it was helpful. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I think that's, unless anyone has more questions, that's at least all I have. So
later on, how will we access this recording if we just want to take better handwritten notes?
Yeah, so that will be on the workshop page on our website, and we'll also post it on our YouTube. So yeah, it'll all be on the same workshops page.
Does the main web page have the YouTube link?
The YouTube video will be linked on the workshop page.
Okay, that's great.
So yeah, I think that's all I have. Thank you all so much for joining. Hopefully it was helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.